A pregnant single mother accidentally calls for help and awakens the heart of a lonely millionaire, a mistake that will change their lives forever. Get ready. This story will move you. Subscribe and leave your like. The sound of rain hitting the windows of General Hospital echoed through the halls like an incessant drum. It was a typical Tuesday in March in New York City. One of those days when the grey sky seems to suck all the colour out of the city, leaving only shades of concrete and melancholy. Sarah Johnson adjusted her white lab coat over her 6-month belly, feeling the weight of the baby growing inside her as a constant reminder of her new reality. At 28 years old, an obstetric nurse for 5 years, she never imagined she would be experiencing pregnancy from the inside of the statistics. A single mother struggling to survive in the concrete jungle of New York. "Sarah, you shouldn't be here today," murmured Dr. Smith, the chief obstetrician, watching her with concern as she mechanically organized the patient files. "Your last checkup showed that your blood pressure is rising. You need to rest." She paused for a moment, holding a file against her chest. Her brown eyes, once bright like honey, now carried shadows of fatigue that no amount of makeup could disguise. "Doctor, with all due respect, who's going to pay my bills if I don't work? Alex left me with a credit card bill of $5,000 and overdue rent. Rest is a luxury I can't afford." The mention of her ex-boyfriend made her voice tremble slightly. Alex had vanished like smoke in the wind when he learned of the pregnancy, leaving only a scribbled note on the kitchen table. "I'm not ready for this. Sorry." As if 3 years of relationship could be erased with a poorly written word on a piece of paper. Dr. Smith sighed, knowing the stubbornness of the young nurse. Sarah was one of the best professionals he had seen in decades of career. Competent, dedicated, with a natural empathy that calmed the most nervous patients. But she was also too proud to accept help, a trait he recognized from watching her care for her own mother for months before she passed away from cancer the previous year. "Sarah, be reasonable. You are in early preeclampsia. If you don't take care of yourself now, you could lose the baby," he said, placing his hand on her shoulder. "And if that happens, what will it matter that you worked so hard?" She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a familiar pain tighten her chest. It was the same feeling she had when her mother looked at her from the hospital bed, silently begging her not to sacrifice so much. "I know, doctor, but I can't stop. Not now." The conversation was interrupted by screams coming from the hallway. A young woman, appearing to be no more than 17, had arrived. At the obstetric emergency room in advanced labor, Sarah rushed to help, momentarily forgetting her own pains as she focused on calming the patient. "What's your name, dear?" Sarah asked, holding the girl's hand as she writhed in pain. Jessica Miller," the young woman groaned. "Please, don't let my baby die. I have no one." The words hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach. It was like looking into a mirror of the future, young, alone, desperate. She squeezed Jessica's hand tighter. "I won't let anything happen to you both, okay? You're not alone." 3 hours later, Sarah watched Jessica cradle her newborn baby, a healthy boy weighing 3 kilograms. The radiant smile of the young mother contrasted with the tears rolling down her cheeks. It was a powerful reminder that, despite all fears and uncertainties, something miraculous was growing inside each of them. When her shift finally ended at 7 p.m., Sarah felt the weight of exhaustion fall upon her shoulders like a wet blanket. Her legs trembled slightly as she walked through the hospital parking lot, the fine rain turning the asphalt into a black mirror reflecting the yellowed lights of the street lamps. Inside, her 2010 Honda Civic, she started the engine and sat for a few minutes watching the windshield wipers struggle against the persistent rain. The cell phone on the passenger seat displayed several missed calls from unknown numbers, probably debt collectors trying to reach Alex through her. She had changed her number 3 times in the last 2 months, but they always found a way to locate her. As she drove through the flooded streets of Brooklyn toward her small rented apartment, Sarah felt a different kind of cramp. It wasn't the common pain of pregnancy, but something more intense, more concerning. She pulled over on Frédéric Coutinho Street, breathing deeply as she tried to control the panic that was beginning to form in her chest. With trembling hands, she grabbed her cell phone and searched her contacts for the obstetric emergency number. The cracked screen of the device made it hard to read, and the battery showed only 15% charge. She dialed quickly, feeling another stronger cramp as the phone rang. "Hello?" A deep, calm male voice answered on the other end. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. "Dr. Smith, thank God I reached you. I'm feeling very strong cramps and—" "Sorry, I think you dialed the wrong number," the voice interrupted, sounding confused. "This is Almeida Construction." Sarah's heart raced. She looked at her phone, realizing that in her haste she had dialed the wrong number. Another cramp made her double over the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, I need to call the hospital. I'm pregnant and—" "Calm down," said the voice on the other end, now with a tone of genuine concern. "Are you okay? Are you driving?" Sarah began to cry, the stress and fear finally breaking the barrier of control she had maintained for months. "I don't know. I think I'm not. I'm so scared. I have no one to help me and—" "Listen, I don't know who you are, but don't hang up," said the man, his voice taking on a protective tone that Sarah hadn't heard in a long time. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, feeling a strange sense of security in that unfamiliar voice. "Sarah, my name is David. Where are you right now?" And so, on a rainy night in March, 2 lonely souls connected through the copper wires that link New York City, unaware that this wrong number would change their lives forever. On the other end of the line, on the 32nd floor of Corporate Tower, David Thompson still held the phone to his ear, even after Sarah had hung up to seek medical help. At 34, he had built a real estate empire that spanned the entire metropolitan area of New York City. But he had never felt his heart race so much because of the voice of a stranger. The office around him reflected his meticulous personality. Dark mahogany furniture, a bookshelf filled with books on architecture and economics, and large windows offering a panoramic view of the illuminated city. Abstract paintings adorned the walls, chosen more for their investment value than for personal taste. Everything there exuded success and control, except the man who now paced restlessly around the space, unable to shake off the desperate voice of Sarah from his mind. "Mr. Thompson." The voice of Jessica Taylor, his executive assistant, cut through his thoughts. She had entered the office without knocking, as she always did when she felt entitled to interrupt anything. At 29, Jessica was the kind of woman who turned every public appearance into a carefully rehearsed performance. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her nails immaculate, and her designer clothes cost more than the monthly salary of most New Yorkers. "You missed dinner with the Japanese investors. They were waiting at the Four Seasons." David glanced at his wristwatch. A Rolex he had bought more as a status symbol than out of necessity. It was almost 9 p.m. Dinner had started at 7:30, exactly when Sarah had called. "Cancel all my appointments for the week," he said, sitting back down behind the executive desk. "Cancel?" Jessica raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "David, we're talking about $15 million in investments. The Japanese flew 14 hours for this meeting." She always called him by his first name when they were alone, an intimacy he had never authorized, but also never bothered to correct. Jessica had been his assistant for 3 years, quickly promoted due to her impeccable efficiency and ability to anticipate his professional needs. What he didn't realize was how she interpreted this professional closeness. "Reschedule for next week," David said, opening one of the documents scattered across his desk without really focusing on the content. And next time, knock before entering. Jessica approached the desk. Placing one hand on the documents, he pretended to read. Her red nails contrasted with the white paper. "You've been acting strange since you got back from lunch. Did something happen?" David looked up, noticing for the first time how her perfume was too strong, almost suffocating. "I'm fine. I just need to sort some things out." "I can help with anything," she offered, leaning slightly over the desk. "You know you can always count on me for anything." The insinuation did not go unnoticed, but David was already mentally elsewhere, thinking about the vulnerability he had felt in Sarah's voice, so different from the cold calculation that permeated all his professional interactions. "Thank you, Jessica, but it's something personal." She straightened up, an expression of irritation quickly passing over her face before being replaced by a professional smile. "Sure, I'll reschedule the meetings then. Good night, David." When he was finally alone, David walked to the window and watched the city's hustle and bustle below. The car lights formed golden and red rivers on the avenues, each point of light representing a life, a story, a daily struggle he had disconnected from long ago. His own journey from the orphanages on the outskirts to that office. At the top of the city had been paved with relentless determination and an emotional coldness he had cultivated as a survival mechanism. He remembered the early years after losing his parents in a car accident when he was 8. With no close relatives willing to take him in, he had spent a decade being shuffled between orphanages and temporary foster families. Each new home represented a hope that was soon shattered when the caretakers decided he was too problematic or when a younger, easier child came along. By 18, David had left the last orphanage with a backpack, $300 in his pocket, and a promise to himself he would never again depend emotionally on anyone. He worked during the day at a construction site and studied business at night at New York University. Every brick he carried, every equation he solved, every exam he passed was another step up the ladder that would take him far from the vulnerability of poverty. The ringing of the phone brought him back to the present. For a moment, his heart raced at the thought that it might be Sarah calling again. But the number on the display showed Bruno Architects, his best friend and partner since college. "David, man, where have you been? Jessica said you cancelled dinner with the Japanese." Bruno Ferreira's concerned voice came through the line. "That's not like you." Bruno was everything David was not. Emotional, spontaneous, genuinely believing in the goodness of people. Coming from a well-off family from the Upper East Side, he had chosen architecture out of passion, not necessity. His optimistic view of life often irritated David, but it was also one of the few things that kept him connected to some humanity. "An emergency came up," David said. As he loosened the Hermes tie that suddenly felt like it was choking him, he said, "What kind of emergency makes you ignore 15 million in investments? Man, you're worrying me. Ever since Emily broke up with you last year, you've been even more closed off than usual." The mention of his ex-fiancée brought a familiar pang of irritation. Emily had ended the engagement, claiming he was emotionally unavailable, and that she felt like an expensive accessory in his life. At the time, he had been more annoyed by the practical inconvenience than any real emotional pain. "It has nothing to do with Emily," David replied, walking back to his chair. "And it wasn't my emergency. A pregnant woman called by mistake, thinking she was speaking to a doctor. She was having complications and you got involved." Bruno sounded surprised. "Man, that's really strange coming from you. Normally you'd transfer the call and forget about it in 5 minutes." David paused for a moment, trying to understand why he had reacted differently. She sounded desperate, alone. "And you identified with that," Bruno observed, with the annoying insight that only longtime friends possess. David, you help a lot of people through your social responsibility projects, but you always keep emotional distance. Who is this woman? I don't know. I just know her name is Sarah and that she has no one to help her. On the other end of the line, Bruno took a long pause. You're getting attached to a stranger. That's not like you. David looked at the phone on his desk, wondering if Sarah had managed to get medical help. The concern he felt was strange, almost irritating in its intensity. Maybe it's time for me to change how I am. Be careful, David. Desperate people sometimes do desperate things. You have a lot to lose. When he hung up the phone, David was left alone with his thoughts in the silent office. Outside, the rain had stopped, but he barely noticed. His mind was occupied with the memory of a voice that had awakened something in him that he thought had been dead for a long time, the desire to protect someone without expecting anything in return. Sarah woke up in the general hospital with the bitter taste of saline in her mouth and a throbbing headache. The fluorescent light in the semi-private room cut through her eyes like razors, and the characteristic smell of hospital disinfectant reminded her of all the shifts she had worked there. Now, ironically, she was on the other side of the doctor-patient relationship. "Finally awake," said Dr. Smith, entering the room with a chart in hand and a serious expression that Sarah knew all too well. It was the same face he made when he had to deliver bad news to families. "How are you feeling?" Sarah tried to sit up in bed, but a wave of dizziness made her give up. "Like a truck ran over me. Is the baby okay?" "For now, yes. But Sarah, you had a dangerous hypertensive crisis last night. Your blood pressure reached 180 over 110. If you hadn't gotten here when you did..." He paused, leaving the implications hanging in the air. "I'll be direct with you. You need complete rest, no work for at least the next 2 months. The words hit Sarah like a death sentence. 2 months without working meant 2 months without a paycheck, without health insurance, without a way to pay the bills that were already piling up on her kitchen table. "Doctor, that's impossible. I can't..." "Sarah," Dr. Smith interrupted, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "Do you want to bring this baby into the world, or do you want to die trying? Because at the rate you're going, one of those two things is going to happen." She closed her eyes, feeling the tears burn before they even began to fall. "I have no choice. I have no family. I have no one. If I don't work, I'll lose my apartment. I won't be able to buy things for the baby. And if you die, who will take care of the baby?" The doctor's blunt question made her open her eyes. "Sarah, in 5 years of working with you, I've never seen you accept help from anyone. But now, it's not just about you." Through the window of the room, she could see the morning bustle of New York City starting to pick up pace. People hurried along the sidewalks, cars jostled for space in traffic, life moving on while hers seemed to be crumbling. "How much time do I have to decide?" "You don't have time, Sarah. The decision has already been made. I'm taking you off work for medical risk. HR will process the benefits, but it will take at least a month before you start receiving." After Dr. Smith left, Sarah was alone with the weight of her new reality. She picked up her phone from the bedside table. Someone had plugged it in to charge overnight. Several unread messages flashed on the screen: bill collectors, the landlord asking about overdue rent, and a message from Lisa, her only close friend. "I heard you're in the hospital. I'm coming as soon as I get off work. Don't try to stop me." Sarah smiled for the first time in days. Lisa Brown was a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, a 32-year-old black woman who had grown up in the same neighborhood as Sarah but had managed to secure a better-paying job in the Upper East Side. They had met in college and maintained a solid friendship despite their lives taking different paths. At 3 p.m., Lisa appeared in the room carrying a brown paper bag that exuded the tempting aroma of cinnamon rolls. "I brought real snacks, because this hospital food is a violation of human rights," she said, kissing Sarah's forehead before sitting in the chair. Lisa had a presence that filled any room. Her curly hair was styled in an elegant bun, and she wore a navy blazer that cost half of Sarah's salary, but Sarah had managed to get it on sale. She was the kind of person who turned difficulties into opportunities and never let a friend face problems alone. "So, tell me exactly what happened last night," Lisa said, pulling a sandwich from the bag. "I got a call from Dr. Smith at 10 p.m. saying you were here." Sarah recounted the cramps, the rush to the hospital, and then hesitated. "Lisa, something strange happened last night. When I was feeling the pain, I called what I thought was the emergency number, but it was the wrong number. And so, these things happen. But the man who answered, he was very kind. He stayed on the line with me until I got here. He said his name was David." Lisa stopped chewing and looked at her friend with a playful expression. "Sarah Johnson, are you telling me that in the middle of a medical emergency you flirted with a stranger on the phone?" "It wasn't flirting," Sarah protested, feeling her face heat up. "He was just attentive, different from all the men I've met lately." "Different how?" Sarah thought for a moment. "He listened to me, really listened. He didn't try to downplay my fears or give me empty advice. He just stayed there, on the other end of the line, until he was sure I was safe." "And do you have his number?" "It's in my call log, but I can't call again. That would be too weird." Lisa leaned forward, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Sarah, you've spent the last 6 months isolating yourself since Alex left you. Maybe the universe is sending you a sign. The universe is sending me overdue bills and high blood pressure, Lisa. I don't need to complicate my life with fantasies about a stranger. Or maybe you need to stop carrying the world on your shoulders alone," Lisa replied, her voice taking on the serious tone she used when she wanted Sarah to really listen. "Since your mother passed away, you've locked yourself in a toxic independence bubble. You don't let anyone get close." Sarah looked away toward the window. "Independence isn't toxic. It's survival. Not when it's literally and figuratively killing you." Lisa took her friend's hand. "Sarah, you almost lost the baby last night. Your blood pressure spiked because you're carrying a stress load that one person can't bear." "And what do you want me to do? Call a stranger and say, 'Hi, I'm the desperate pregnant woman who called yesterday. Do you want to be my Prince Charming?' I want you to stop being afraid of being human," Lisa said gently. "Your mother spent her whole life sacrificing for everyone, and you learned that love means suffering in silence. But it doesn't have to be that way." Sarah felt tears welling up. "Lisa, I don't know how to be different. Every time I've trusted someone, I've been abandoned. My father left when I was 5. Alex ran away when I needed him most. How am I supposed to raise a child if I don't even know how to trust people?" "Start slow, one step at a time." Lisa held Sarah's phone. "What was the name of the company?" "Thompson Construction." "Why?" Lisa was already typing into Google. "Because if this David works at a construction company in New York City and was kind to you, I'm going to find out who he is." "Lisa, no!" "Too late," Lisa said, showing her the phone screen. "Thompson Construction, specializing in high-end developments in the Upper West Side. The owner is—" She stopped speaking, her eyes widening. "What is it?" "Sarah, your David isn't just an employee. David Thompson is the owner of the company. And according to this report from Exam, he has an estimated net worth of over $100 million. The room fell silent. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The man who had been so kind and attentive last night wasn't just any stranger. He was one of the wealthiest businessmen in New York City. "This changes everything," she whispered, more to herself than to Lisa. David couldn't concentrate on anything. He had spent the whole night thinking about Sarah's desperate voice, and now, sitting in his conference room overlooking Central Park, he pretended to pay attention while Vanessa presented the last quarter's numbers to a team of German investors. The projects in the Upper West Side have seen an average appreciation of 23% in the last 6 months, Vanessa said, pointing to colorful graphs on the LED screen. She wore a fitted black dress that accentuated her curves, and David noticed how she strategically positioned herself so he had a prime view while she spoke. "Especially in Brooklyn, where we are revitalizing 3 entire blocks." Brooklyn. David's heart raced. Sarah had said she was driving through Brooklyn when she had the cramps. It would be too much of a coincidence if she lived right in the neighborhood his projects were gentrifying. "Mr. Thompson," the German investor's voice brought him back to the meeting. "Do you agree with the growth projection presented by Ms. Taylor?" David blinked, realizing he had completely lost track of the conversation. "Sorry, could you repeat the question?" Vanessa looked at him with a surprised and irritated expression. In 3 years of partnership, David had never been distracted during an important presentation. "Mr. Miller was asking about our strategy to deal with local community resistance to the new developments." It was a question David knew how to answer by heart. He had repeated the same speech dozens of times to investors concerned about the social issue of his projects. But this time, the words tasted bitter in his mouth. "Our approach is pragmatic. We offer above-market values for existing properties, facilitating the relocation of current residents." "And those who don't want to move," Mr. Miller pressed. Vanessa stepped forward to answer. "Urban progress inevitably meets resistance. Our legal team is very efficient in resolving these issues." David knew that appropriate legal channels was a euphemism for eviction processes his team pursued against families who refused to sell their homes for prices that, while above market value, were not enough for them to purchase similar properties in other upscale areas of New York City. It was business, he always told himself. He couldn't save everyone. But now, thinking of Sarah, pregnant and desperate, he wondered how many other stories like hers his projects had created. After the Germans left, apparently satisfied with the numbers presented, David found himself alone in the conference room with Jessica. She began organizing the documents scattered across the table, moving with a calculated grace he recognized as a performance. "David, you don't seem well today," she said, approaching him with a look of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you want to talk about what's bothering you?" He watched her for a moment. Her perfectly styled blonde hair, impeccable makeup, the expensive perfume that created an aura of artificial sophistication. Jessica was exactly the type of woman who circulated in his world, ambitious, calculating, interested in what he could offer far more than in who he really was. "Jessica, when you look at our projects in Brooklyn, what do you see?" The question caught her off guard. "I see investment opportunity, an area on the rise, good location, excellent potential for financial return. Why? And the people who lived there before?" She frowned, as if he were asking a nonsensical question. "David, what's happened to you? Since yesterday, you've been talking like a social worker. These people benefit from our projects. 2, they receive fair prices for their properties and can invest in real estate in areas more suitable for their socio-economic status." "More suitable for their socio-economic status," David repeated slowly. "You mean further from downtown, with less infrastructure, no access to the subway?" "Exactly," Jessica smiled, seemingly relieved that he was understanding her logic. "That's how the market works, David. We can't be responsible for solving all the social problems in New York City." David stood up and walked to the window, Down below, he could see people crossing the park, families with children, young couples, elderly people, walking slowly, each with their own struggles, their own fears, their own hopes. What if we could? What? What if we could solve at least some social problems? What if our projects included affordable housing, daycare centers, health clinics? Jessica laughed, a sharp and artificial sound. David, you're talking about philanthropy, not business. Our investors expect returns, not charity. What if I told you I'm thinking about diversifying our portfolio, including social projects that are also financially viable? Jessica's expression changed instantly. The mask of caring concern disappeared, replaced by something colder and more calculated. I'd say you're having a midlife crisis, and that maybe you should talk to a therapist before making decisions that could affect the entire future of the company. The bluntness of her response shocked him. Jessica, no, David, you hired me to be your executive assistant, but over the past 3 years, I've become much more than that. I know this company as well as you do. I work 60 hours a week to ensure it grows, and I won't sit quietly while you destroy it because of an existential crisis. David looked at her with new eyes. For the first time, he clearly saw the raw ambition that had always been there, masked by professional efficiency and calculated charm. And what exactly do you think your role is here? She stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his chest. My role is to keep you focused on what really matters, on what you've built, on what we've built together. He stepped away from her touch. We haven't built anything together, Jessica. You're my employee. Her face contorted in an expression of anger that she quickly tried to mask. Of course. Sorry if I misinterpreted our professional partnership. David's phone rang, interrupting the tense moment. It was Bruno. David, I need to talk to you. Can you come down to my office? Now? Now. It's about that pregnant woman you mentioned yesterday. David felt his stomach tighten. What about her? Come here and I'll tell you. 15 minutes later, David was in Bruno's architecture office, 3 floors down. The environment was completely different from his. Exposed brick walls, plants scattered in the corners, drawing boards competing for space with computers. It was creative and chaotic, just like Bruno himself. Take a seat, Bruno said, pointing to a worn leather chair. I need to tell you something. If it's to tell me I'm being irrational. Sarah Johnson, Bruno interrupted him. 29 years old, obstetric nurse at General Hospital, lives at Harmony Street, 847, apartment 23. David stood up immediately. How do you know this? Because I hired a private investigator to find out who she is, Bruno said calmly. And you'll want to sit down when you hear the rest. Bruno, this is an invasion of privacy. David, you spent the entire night talking about a stranger. That's not normal for you. I needed to make sure it wasn't some kind of scam. David sat down slowly. And is it? No. Bruno sighed. But it's worse than that, man. Harmony Street 847 is in the middle of the Brooklyn Gardens project. Her building is set to be demolished next month. David's world stopped. The woman who had awakened something in his heart lived right in one of the properties he had bought to demolish. The project that would represent one of the biggest profits for his company would also mean that Sarah would lose her home. Sarah was sitting on the balcony of her small apartment, watching the traffic on Harmony Street through the protective bars. It was a Thursday evening, a week after her discharge from the hospital, and she was trying to organize the bills. Sarah Johnson sat at the small white plastic table she had bought on sale 3 years ago. The apartment was simple but cozy. 2 small bedrooms, an open-plan living room and kitchen, a tiny bathroom, and a balcony that barely fit 2 chairs, but offered a privileged view of the vibrant neighborhood life. It was there that she used to have her morning coffee, listening to the sound of buses on Frédéric Coutinho Street and watching people rush off to work. Electricity bill, $287. Water bill, $134. Rent, $1,800, she murmured, jotting down notes in a well-used notebook. Credit card, $4,190. That last figure made her sigh deeply. Alex had used her card to buy a PlayStation 5 and other gifts for himself in the last months of their relationship, always promising he would pay her back next week. The medical leave benefits had not yet hit her account, and her savings were quickly dwindling. Even more concerning was the letter she had received that morning from the building manager, informing her that the building had been sold to a construction company and that all tenants would have to vacate their apartments by the end of May. Thompson Construction, she read aloud, feeling a strange tightening in her chest. The same last name as the man who had been kind to her during the wrong phone call. It couldn't be a coincidence. The sound of the intercom pulled her from her thoughts. "Hello? Sarah, it's me." Lisa's voice echoed through the device. "I brought dinner and some news." A few minutes later, Lisa climbed the stairs carrying 2 plastic bags that exuded the tempting aroma of crab cakes. "Crab cakes from Dinha, from Potato Square," she said, kissing her friend's cheek. "And before you complain about the price, it was my boss who paid. He said that a pregnant employee of a colleague deserves a treat." Sarah smiled for the first time in days. Dr. Miller is such a sweetheart. They sat on the balcony, sharing the crab cakes as the sun began to set behind the neighborhood buildings. Lisa noticed the bills scattered across the table and the letter from the manager. "So it's true," she said, picking up the letter. "I heard at the hospital that several old buildings in Brooklyn are being sold to construction companies." "Lisa," Sarah hesitated, "the company that bought my building is Thompson, the same as David." Lisa stopped chewing. "Do you think he knows?" "I don't know. Maybe he isn't really the owner. Maybe he's just an employee using the company's last name." Sarah tried to convince herself, but she knew she was fooling herself. "In any case, it doesn't matter. I'm never speaking to him again." "Sarah, you can't give up on something that hasn't even started because of a coincidence." "Coincidence?" Sarah stood up, walking to the balcony railing. "Lisa, the man who messed with me could be the same one trying to evict me. It's not a coincidence. It's cruel irony. Or it's an opportunity for you to find out what kind of person he really is." Sarah looked at her friend in disbelief. "Lisa, I'm an unemployed nurse, pregnant, about to be evicted. He's a multi-millionaire businessman. In what alternate universe would we have anything in common?" "In the universe where he stayed on the line with you during a medical emergency without knowing who you were or what he could gain from it," Lisa replied calmly. "Sarah, you're afraid of discovering that there are good people in the world, because that would mean you've been unlucky enough to meet only the bad ones until now." Sarah's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. "Hello? Sarah? This is David. We talked last week. You were—" Sarah's heart raced. She gestured for Lisa to be quiet. "I remember. How did you get my number?" On the other end of the line, David hesitated. "It was complicated, but I needed to talk to you. How are you? And the baby?" His voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, calm, with a sincerity that disarmed her. "We're fine. I had to be on complete bed rest, but the doctor said the danger has passed." "I'm relieved to hear that." There was a pause. "Sarah, can I ask you a question? Where do you live?" Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Why do you want to know?" "It's just that something happened, a coincidence that I need to tell you in person." "What kind of coincidence?" Another long pause. "I'd prefer to talk in person. Would you be willing to have coffee with me?" Sarah looked at Lisa, who was making exaggerated gestures, encouraging her to accept. "David, It's kind of complicated. Please, just a conversation. I can come to you, or you can choose the place. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling as if she were about to jump off a cliff. There's a cafe on Fradique Coutinho Street, near Aspicuelta, Café do Beco. Do you know it? I'll find it. What time would be good for you? Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Perfect. Sarah? Yes? Thank you for agreeing. I know it's strange, but I needed to see you. When she hung up, Lisa was looking at her with a huge smile. He wants to see you. Lisa, I think he knows about the building. His voice sounded strange, like he was hiding something. Then it's the perfect opportunity for you to find out what kind of man he really is. If he's like Alex, he'll make excuses and try to shirk responsibility. If he's different what? Is he going to offer me a new apartment in exchange for sexual favors? Lisa stood up and held her friend's shoulders. Sarah Johnson, stop projecting your traumas onto people you barely know. Give this story a chance to be different from the others. That night, Sarah stayed up late, thinking about the conversation she would have the next day. From her bedroom window, she could see the lights of the neighboring apartments, each representing a family that had also received the eviction notice. Mrs. Smith, the 78-year-old retiree from the next door, she had cried in the hallway when she learned she would have to move. Mr. Johnson, the popcorn vendor who had worked on the corner for 15 years, didn't know where he would set up his stand after. The block was demolished. All these stories could be connected to the man who had awakened something special in her heart. The irony was too cruel to be a coincidence. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move for the first time more intensely. "What kind of world am I bringing you into, little one?" she whispered, "where the people who make us feel special are the same ones who destroy our lives." But even with all the fears and uncertainties, a part of her was eager to see David in person, to find out if the man behind the gentle voice was real or just another cruel illusion in her journey of disillusionments. David arrived at the Alley Cafe 20 minutes before the scheduled time, choosing a table in the back where he could observe the entrance. The place was exactly the kind of establishment he would normally avoid, small, simple, with mismatched furniture and a menu written by hand on a chalkboard hanging on the wall. But there was something cozy about it, an authenticity that contrasted with the upscale restaurants he frequented on the Upper East Side. He ordered an espresso and watched the street activity through the foggy window. Kids coming back from school, mothers pushing strollers, young people with musical instruments on their way to some rehearsal. It was a microcosm of real life that he had disconnected from years ago. "David?" The female voice made him turn. Sarah was standing next to the table, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. She was completely different from any woman he had ever known. She didn't have the artificial and calculated beauty of the socialites who circulated in his world, but possessed something far more powerful, a natural and authentic beauty that shone through the evident fatigue in her brown eyes. She wore a simple navy blue dress that delicately accentuated her 6-month baby bump, and her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun. There wasn't a drop of excessive makeup, just a light coral lipstick that highlighted her naturally full lips. "Sarah!" He quickly stood up, extending his hand. When she shook it, he felt an electric current surge through his arm. "Thank you for coming." "Hi." She smiled shyly, and David noticed how her face transformed completely when she smiled. "Sorry for the delay. I had a medical appointment that took longer than I expected." They sat across from each other, and David realized he didn't know where to start. He had rehearsed several ways to approach the topic all morning, but now, looking at her, all the words felt inadequate. "How are you feeling?" he asked, noticing how she instinctively placed her hand on her belly. "Better. The doctor said my blood pressure stabilized. but I still need to be careful." She studied his face attentively. "You're exactly how I imagined from your voice." "What do you mean?" "Seriously, composed. Someone used to having all the answers." She paused. "But there's also something in your eyes that doesn't match the image." David felt exposed. "What do you see?" "Loneliness." The answer was so direct that it caught him off guard. "It's the same thing people see in my eyes." They fell silent for a moment, each processing the woman's observation before them. Sarah was the first to speak again. "David, in your call yesterday you said you had a coincidence to tell me about. What is it?" He took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Sarah, I need to ask you something first. Where exactly do you live?" She furrowed her brow. "Harmony Street, 847. Why?" David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling as if he was about to throw a grenade in the middle of the conversation. "Because my company bought your building for demolition." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked at him as if he had just slapped her in the face. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed the information. "Your company," she repeated slowly. "Thompson Construction." "Yes." "You're the owner." "Yes." Sarah stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair in the process. "Son of a bitch!" The curse word came out low, but with a concentrated anger that made David shrink. "You knew from the beginning, didn't you?" "Sarah, no. I just found out yesterday that—" "Lie!" She raised her voice, making other people in the cafe look in their direction. "You called me because you knew who I was. You wanted to see the face of the idiot you're evicting." David stood up too, trying to approach her. "I swear to God I didn't know. I just found out yesterday that you live in the building we bought. And why would I believe you?" Tears began to stream down her face. "You're just like everyone else, rich, powerful, playing with people's lives because you can." "Sarah, please let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you pretend to be kind while destroying people's lives? How you called me to have fun with my despair?" "I didn't have fun with anything," David exclaimed, his own voice rising. "I spent the whole week thinking about you, worried if you were okay, if the baby was okay." "Worried?" Sarah laughed humorlessly. "How convenient. The man who's evicting me was worried about me." David looked around, realizing they had become the center of attention in the small cafe. "Can we talk privately? I can explain everything." "There's nothing to explain, and there's nothing to talk about." Sarah grabbed her bag, a simple fabric bag that starkly contrasted with the designer bags he was used to seeing. "You want my apartment, you can have it, but don't use me as entertainment in the process." "Sarah, wait!" She stopped at the cafe door, and she turned to look at him one last time. "You know what's funny, David? For a moment I thought there might be someone different in the world. Someone who truly cared, who was kind without any ulterior motives. But you're just like all the other men in my life. You only think about yourself." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Then tell me, are you going to cancel the demolition of my building?" David opened his mouth but couldn't respond. How could he explain that cancelling the project would mean losing 15 million in investments, that there were signed contracts, employees who depended on that project, international investors involved? His silence was enough of an answer for Sarah. "That's what I thought. Goodbye, David, and thank you for showing me that my distrust of people was right from the beginning." David stood frozen in the middle of the cafe, watching Sarah disappear down Frédéric Coutinho Street. The other patrons gradually returned to their conversations, but he remained there, motionless, feeling as if he had just lost something precious that he hadn't even realized he was searching for. He paid for the coffees and walked through the streets of Brooklyn. For the first time, he truly observed the neighborhood that his projects were transforming. He saw families in the windows of old buildings, kids playing on the sidewalks, elderly people chatting on the doorsteps of establishments that had been there for decades. Every face was a story. Every story was a life that would be affected by his business decisions. And Sarah was at the center of it all. The woman who had awakened something in his heart was also the living representation of all the human consequences of his business. When he reached his car, David sat in the driver's seat for several minutes without starting the engine. For the first time in years, he questioned whether financial success was worth the human price he was paying. And for the first time in his adult life, he considered the possibility that perhaps there was something more important than money and power. But he also knew that admitting this would mean questioning everything he had built, everything he had based his identity on since he was 8 years old, when he decided he would never be vulnerable or dependent on anyone again. 2 weeks passed since the confrontation in the cafe, and Sarah felt as if she were living in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. The deadline to vacate the apartment had been moved up to the end of April, just 3 weeks away, and she still hadn't found a place to live that fit her tight budget. It was a Saturday morning when she was packing her mother's medical books, trying to decide what to keep and what to donate, when she felt something different. A sudden pain in her lower abdomen made her double over the cardboard box. "It can't be," she whispered, placing her hand on her belly. At just 6.5 months pregnant, it was too early for any signs of labor. Another, more intense pain made her fall to her knees on the bedroom floor. This was not a Braxton Hicks contraction. It was something much more serious. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and called Lisa. "Sarah, it's Saturday morning. Why are you—" "Lisa," Sarah interrupted, struggling to keep her voice calm. "I need to go to the hospital now." "What happened?" "Contractions. A lot of pain. The baby is in danger. I'm on my way. Don't move." While waiting for Lisa to arrive, Sarah lay on the bedroom floor, trying to control her breathing, as she had learned in her obstetric nursing classes. Ironically, all her technical knowledge seemed useless when she was the patient. Through the window, she could hear the normal sounds of a Saturday morning in the neighborhood. Kids playing in the street, music coming from some apartment, the noise of cars on Frederic Coutinho. Normal life continuing its course while hers seemed to be crumbling once again. On the other side of the city, in his apartment in the Upper East Side, David was trying to focus on a pile of contracts when Bruno appeared unannounced, using the spare key he had received years ago. "Dude, you haven't answered your phone in a week," Bruno said, entering the living room with 2 cups of coffee from a local coffee shop. "Jessica said you cancelled all your meetings." David was sitting on the white leather sofa, still in his pajamas, with an unshaven beard that gave him a completely disheveled look. Papers were scattered around, some documents from the Brooklyn Gardens project marked with angry notes in red pen. "I'm rethinking the project," David murmured, not lifting his eyes from the papers. "Rethinking how?" "Cancelling." Bruno nearly spilled the coffee. "David, have you lost your mind? That's $15 million. It's a building full of families, Bruno." David finally looked at his friend. "Families who are going to lose their homes because I decided that land is worth more empty than with the lives that exist there." "David, this is business. It has always been this way." "It shouldn't be." Bruno sat down in the armchair across from the sofa, studying his friend's face. In 15 years of partnership, he had never seen David question the ethics of his business. "Is this because of Sarah?" "I don't know." David ran his hands through his messy hair. "Maybe. Or maybe it's because I've finally stopped to think about what I'm doing with my life." "And what are you doing?" "Destroying people's lives in the name of progress. Just like they did to me when I was a kid. Except now I'm the villain of the story." Bruno took a deep breath. "David, you grew up in orphanages because your parents died in an accident, not because someone evicted them." But I grew up poor because no one cared what would happen to me afterward. And now I'm the one who doesn't care what happens to the families I evict. From their homes. David's phone rang. It was Jessica. He let it go to voicemail. She's been calling for days, Bruno said. He observed. Jessica is furious because I'm jeopardizing the financial stability of the company with sentimentalism, in her words. And is she? David stood up and walked to the panoramic window that offered a view of Central Park. Bruno, throughout my adult life, I've believed that money was security. The more I had, the more protected I would be. But what's the point of all this protection if I'm completely alone? You're not alone. You have the company, the employees, friends. I have employees who depend on my money, not on me. I have an assistant who sees me as a stepping stone in her career, and I have a best friend who's trying to convince me not to do the first right thing in my life. Bruno was silent for a moment. What do you want to do? I want to find a way to keep the project without evicting families. I want to turn it into something that benefits everyone, not just the investors. And Sarah? David sighed. Sarah hates me, and she has every right to, but I can't undo what I've done. I can only try to do better from now on. The phone rang again. This time it was a number David didn't recognize. Hello? David? It was the voice of a woman he didn't know, sounding tense and worried. This is Lisa, a friend of Sarah. You need to come to General Hospital now. David's heart stopped. What happened? Sarah is in premature labor. She's very scared and she asked for you to be called. She asked. Not in those words, but she kept repeating your name when we got here. I think she needs you, even if she won't admit it. David was already running to his room to get dressed. I'm on my way. What floor? Maternity, 6th floor. David? Yes? Come quickly. The doctors are worried. When David hung up, Bruno watched him dress with a speed he had only seen in business emergencies. Do you want me to go with you? No, this is something I need to do alone. David grabbed his car keys. Bruno, if you're really my friend, cancel the meeting on Monday with the Germans. I'm going to restructure the entire Brooklyn Gardens project. What if that costs us our partnership? David paused at the door, looking at the man who had been his best friend for 15 years. Then we'll find out if our friendship is real or if it was just business. As he drove through the streets of New York City toward the hospital, David realized that for the first time in years, he was running toward something, not away from it. And for the first time since childhood, he wasn't thinking about the financial consequences of his decisions. The only thing that mattered was getting to Sarah. David rushed through the corridors of General Hospital like a man possessed, following the signs that pointed to maternity. The smell of disinfectant and the noise of medical equipment instantly reminded him of the painful memories of when he visited his mother in the hospital shortly before she died. But this time he was running toward life, not away from death. On the 6th floor, he found an elegantly dressed black woman nervously pacing the hallway. She recognized him immediately. After researching him for a week, Lisa knew exactly who she was talking to. David! She approached him, studying him with analytical eyes. I'm Lisa Brown, a friend of Sarah. How is she? David asked immediately, trying to control his rapid breathing. And the baby? The doctors managed to stop the contractions for now, but she's under observation. They think it was caused by extreme stress. Lisa paused significantly. Stress from having to leave the home she shared with her mother, from not having anywhere to go, from being alone in the world. The implicit accusation hit David like a punch to the stomach. It's my fault. Partly, yes. Lisa didn't soften the reality. But you're here now, and she needs to know that. Will she want to see me? Sarah is sedated at the moment, but when she wakes up, she'll need to know she's not alone, even if she won't admit it. Lisa guided him to the waiting room, where some other families were waiting for news about their loved ones. David sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, a stark contrast to the leather armchairs in his private waiting room. "Can I ask you a question?" Lisa said, sitting next to him. "Sure. Why did you come? After the way you two separated at the cafe, why rush? Here when we didn't even know if she'd want to see you." David thought for a moment, trying to put into words something he was still trying to understand himself. "Because since that first call, Sarah has affected me in a way I've never felt before. And because I realize I've spent so much time protecting my heart that I've forgotten how to use it." "And the project? Are you going to continue with the demolition?" "Not in the original way." David looked directly at Lisa. "I want to turn it into mixed-use housing, affordable and middle-class apartments, in the same complex, with commercial space that benefits local businesses, not drives them out." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Is that financially viable?" "Probably not, at least not in the short term, but maybe it's the right thing to do." "And your investors?" "I'll have to convince them, or find others." 2 hours later, Dr. Smith appeared in the waiting room. David stood up immediately. "How is she, Doctor?" Dr. Smith looked from Lisa to David, clearly confused about who was who in Sarah's life. "And you are?" "Complicated to explain," David replied, "but I care a lot about her. Sarah is stable. We managed to stop the premature labor, but she will need to stay hospitalized for at least a week. The stress almost cost the baby's life." The word stress echoed in David's mind like an accusation. "Can I see her?" "She's awake now, but very emotionally fragile. Anything that disturbs her could trigger another episode." David nodded. "I understand." Lisa stood up as well. "Doctor, Sarah needs to know that there are people who care about her. She is facing this pregnancy completely alone." Dr. Smith sighed. 5 minutes, and any sign of stress, you're out." Sarah's room was simple and functional. She was lying on the hospital bed, connected to monitors that recorded her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat. Her eyes were closed, but she didn't seem to be sleeping. "Sarah?" Lisa called softly. Sarah opened her eyes slowly. When she saw David standing in the doorway, her expression went through a series of emotions: surprise, anger, and something that could be relief. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out weak, but with a hint of familiar anger. "Lisa called me. I was worried." "Worried?" Sarah tried to sit up in bed, but a wave of dizziness made her give up. "The man who is evicting me was worried." "Sarah?" David approached the bed, ignoring Lisa's warning look. "I cancelled the project." Sarah blinked several times, as if she wasn't sure she heard correctly. "What?" "The Brooklyn Gardens project, I cancelled it. Your building won't be demolished." "Liar." Tears began to stream down her face. "You're lying to make me feel better." David took his phone out of his pocket and dialed a number. "Bruno?" "Yes, it's me. Can you confirm for Sarah that we cancelled the original project?" He handed the phone to her. Sarah took the device with trembling hands. Bruno's voice sounded clear on the other end. "Hello? Sarah? This is Bruno Ferreira, David's partner. I confirm that the demolition project for your building was officially cancelled this morning. David is restructuring everything." Sarah returned the phone, looking at David as if she were seeing a ghost. "Why? You're going to lose a lot of money." "Because you were right. I can't build my happiness by destroying people's lives." David sat in the chair next to the bed. "And because I almost lost you and the baby, because of my greed. That doesn't change what you did. It doesn't change who you are." "No, but maybe it changes who I can become." Lisa, who had been silently observing the entire conversation, approached the bed. "Sarah, you almost lost the baby today, from stress, from loneliness, from fear." She looked at David and then back at her friend. "Maybe it's time to accept that some people can change, that some people deserve a second chance." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the emotional and physical fatigue of the past week. "I don't know how to trust again, David. Every time I trust someone, I end up hurt." "Then let's take it slow," David said softly. "One day at a time, no pressure. Just let me help. Let me show you that I can be different from what you imagine." The monitors beside the bed showed that both Sarah and the baby were stable. For the first time in weeks, her heart rate seemed calm. "What do you want from me?" she asked, opening her eyes to meet his. "Honestly, I don't know. I just know that since that first call, you awakened something in me that I thought was dead. And almost. Losing you today showed me that I don't want to live without discovering what that means." Sarah looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. Then she turned her gaze back to David. "If I give this a chance, for us, will you promise me one thing? Anything. Promise that you will be honest with me. Always. Even if the truth is hard to hear. I promise." And for the first time since she had discovered who David really was, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some people were capable of change when they found an important reason to do so. 3 months had passed since that terrible day at the hospital, and Sarah was sitting on the balcony of the apartment she now shared with David, watching the twins sleep in their crib side by side. Yes, twins. The surprise had come during one of the prenatal appointments when the ultrasound revealed 2 hearts beating inside her. Emma and Olivia were now 2 weeks old and were completely different from each other. Emma, who had been born first, was calm and observant, with her mother's big, attentive eyes. Olivia was restless and expressive, always moving her little arms as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The apartment in the Upper East Side was a middle ground they had found together. It wasn't the luxury David was used to, nor the simplicity of Sarah's old home, but it was theirs. 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a modern yet functional kitchen, and this balcony where Sarah spent her afternoons watching city life while the girls slept. "Are they sleeping?" David's voice sounded low behind her. He had just arrived from the office, having changed from his suit into jeans and a t-shirt, and was still getting used to the new routine of being a father. Finally, Olivia cried for 2 hours straight today. "I think she has colic." David approached the cribs, watching their daughters with an expression of tenderness that still surprised Sarah. The cold, calculating man she had met at the cafe had transformed into someone who woke up 3 times a night to change diapers and who sang off-key lullabies at 3 a.m. "How was the meeting with the German investors?" Sarah asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "Complicated?" David sat in the chair next to her, running his hand through his hair. "They pulled out of the Brooklyn project for good. They said affordable housing is not compatible with their investment philosophy." "I'm sorry. I'm not." David took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past few months. "I found new investors. A cooperative of social architects from Barcelona is interested in the model we developed. The model we developed was the result of 3 months of joint work between David, Bruno, and Sarah. She had contributed with the perspective of who really lived in Brooklyn, helping to design a project that preserved the neighborhood's identity while providing dignified housing for different social classes. "And what about Jessica?" Sarah asked, although she already knew the answer. "She quit on Friday. Said she couldn't work for an emotionally compromised businessman." David smiled. "I think that was the best compliment I've received in years." Sarah chuckled softly, careful not to wake the girls. Jessica's departure had been inevitable from the moment David decided to restructure the entire company. The assistant had tried everything, from subtle sabotage to a pathetic attempt at seduction, to make him return to serious business. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked, a question she had posed several times in recent months. "Regret what? Meeting you, becoming a father, or changing my company?" "All of it. Complicating your perfect and organized life." David stood up and walked to the balcony, leaning against the railing. From there they could see part of Brooklyn, including the building where Sarah had lived before. "Sarah, my life wasn't perfect. It was empty. I had money, success, but I was completely alone and didn't even realize it. And now? Now I wake up in the middle of the night to change diapers and feel like the luckiest man in the world. Now I have meetings with investors who want to build schools and daycare centers instead of shopping malls, and I get emotional when I see the project on paper." He turned to look at her. "Now I have a family." Sarah's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Lisa. "Sarah, turn on the TV to the local news channel, now." "Why?" "Just do it," and call David. They entered the living room, and David turned on the television. The show, City Alert, was airing a report on gentrification in New York City, and to their surprise, the Brooklyn Gardens project was being highlighted. "This is an example of how urban development can be done in a socially responsible way," the reporter said, as images of the architectural project appeared on the screen. Businessman David Thompson, known for his luxury ventures, surprised the market by developing a model that combines affordable and middle-class housing in the same complex. The camera showed a recorded interview with David from the previous week. Sarah had never seen him on television before. He looked comfortable, but much more human than she had imagined he would be in corporate interviews. "What motivated me to change was realizing that true success is not just measured in profit, but in the positive impact we can have on people's lives," David said on screen. "This project was born when I met someone who showed me that behind every building we demolish, there are stories, dreams, families." The reporter continued, "The pioneering project has already sparked interest from other construction companies and international organizations. But for Thompson, the greatest success is personal." The camera returned to David. "I recently became a father, twins, and I want them to grow up in a world where economic development doesn't come at the expense of human dignity." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. He had talked about the girls on national television, publicly acknowledging fatherhood and their relationship. "You talked about us on TV," she said when the report ended. "I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. The reporter asked what motivated me to change, and I couldn't lie. And what if that affects your business?" "Sarah, in the last 3 months I've learned that the businesses that could be affected by me having a family are exactly the businesses I no longer want to pursue." Emma began to cry in the bedroom, immediately followed by Olivia, as always happened. David stood up to go to them, but Sarah held him by the hand. "David." "Yes." "I love you." It was the first time she had said those words. Over the past few months, they had built something solid and real, but Sarah had always been afraid to verbalize her feelings. Much had changed, much trust had been built, but the fear of being abandoned again was still there. David knelt beside her chair, holding her face in his hands. "I love you too. You and the girls are the best thing that has ever happened to my life. Even with all the chaos, even with the sleepless nights, the extra bills, the responsibility, especially because of that." David kissed her forehead. "Sarah, I spent 26 years of my life running away from any form of emotional vulnerability. You taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, it's courage. The twins' crying was getting louder, and they laughed together. Shall we take care of our daughters? David asked, offering his hand to help her up. Our daughters, Sarah repeated, savoring the words. I like how that sounds. As they walked together to the girls' room, Sarah realized that, for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't afraid of the future. She had found someone who chose to change for love, someone who transformed his greed into generosity, his loneliness into family. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the wrong connections lead us exactly where we need to be. A year after the twins' birth, Sarah was in the garden of the community daycare, First Steps, watching Emma take her first wobbly steps, while Olivia crawled determinedly after a yellow butterfly. The place had been the first completed social project of the new phase of Thompson construction, built exactly where the original shopping centre's parking lot would have been. "Mommy, look!" Emma shouted, letting go of the wooden railing and taking 3 unsteady steps before falling onto the grass, laughing at her own achievement. Sarah smiled, feeling her heart swell with pride. The girls had inherited completely distinct personalities. Emma was cautious but determined, always carefully observing before trying something new. Olivia was pure energy and curiosity, already trying to escape the playpen since she was 6 months old. "Congratulations, Princess!" David appeared behind Sarah. David held Sarah by the waist, watching their daughters play. He wore faded jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt. He had spent the morning painting the walls of the new nursery room with other volunteer parents. "How was the meeting with the city council?" Sarah asked, settling into his embrace. "They approved the project for Brooklyn. We're going to build 2 more daycare centers by the end of the year." David paused, watching Olivia finally catch the butterfly between her chubby little hands before immediately letting it go. "And there's a surprise." "What kind of surprise?" "The kind that involves an important question." Sarah turned to look at him, noticing the unusual nervousness in his expression. "David, you're scaring me." He stepped back slightly, pulling out a small navy blue velvet box from his pocket. The garden around them seemed to fall silent. Even Olivia stopped chasing bugs to watch her parents with her curious eyes. "Sarah Johnson," David said, kneeling right there on the grass. "A year and a half ago, you called the wrong number and changed my life forever. You taught me that love isn't about possession or control, but about growing together, building something greater than ourselves." Sarah felt tears start to form. Other mothers in the garden began to notice what was happening, forming a small, respectful circle around them. "You taught me that true wealth lies in having people we love and who love us back. You taught me that vulnerability is strength, that change is possible, that it's never too late to be a better person." David opened the box, revealing a simple white gold ring with a discreet solitaire diamond. "Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at the man kneeling in front of her, the same one who had answered that desperate call, the same one who had rushed to the hospital when she was in labor, the same one who woke up every morning to help with the girls without complaining. He was no longer the cold, calculating businessman she had met at the cafe. He was David, the man who sang off-key to put their daughters to sleep, who cried watching cartoons with them, who had transformed his entire company because he decided that love was worth more than profit. "Only if you promise one thing," she said, kneeling down as well to be at his level. "Anything. Promise that we will continue to grow together, that when things get tough, we will talk instead of running away, that we will teach our daughters that love is about choosing to stand by each other every day." "I promise." David took her hand, sliding the ring onto her ring finger. "And you promise that you will stop thinking you don't deserve to be loved?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "I promise to try. So, yes?" "Yes!" The garden erupted in applause. Lisa came running from inside the daycare, where she had been coincidentally helping in the kitchen all morning, followed by Dr. Smith, Alex, and several other friends who apparently knew about the plan. "You knew!" Sarah accused Lisa, who was crying almost as much as she was. "Of course I knew. I helped him pick out the ring." Lisa hugged her tightly. "Sarah, I'm so happy for you." Emma and Olivia, apparently deciding that all this excitement needed them, crawled over to their parents. David picked up Olivia while Sarah lifted Emma. "Girls," David said solemnly, "what do you think about Mommy marrying Daddy?" Olivia clapped her hands excitedly while Emma simply hugged Sarah tighter, as if instinctively understanding that something important and good was happening. Dr. Smith approached, a proud smile on his face. "Sarah, I remember when you came to the hospital pregnant and alone, convinced that you would have to face everything by yourself. Just look where you are now. Doctor, without your insistence that I take it easy, none of this would have happened." "Oh dear, love always finds a way. You just needed the right opportunity." Alex appeared next to David, patting his friend's shoulder. "Dude, I still can't believe you pulled it off. When you told me about that call, I thought you were losing it." "I was losing it," David admitted, "losing it in love." As friends celebrated, around them, Sarah and David spent a few minutes just watching their daughters explore the world around them, with the infinite curiosity of small children. The daycare garden was in full bloom. Yellow tulips that had been planted when the project was inaugurated, flower gardens tended by the children and parents, colorful toys scattered across the green grass. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, fixing Emma's hair. "If you hadn't bought my building, none of this would have happened. If you hadn't dialed the wrong number, if I hadn't had those contractions that specific night, if I hadn't stayed working." Elate, they laughed, recognizing the impossible chain of coincidences that had brought them to this moment. But perhaps they weren't coincidences. Perhaps they were just two lost people who needed each other to find their way. "David?" Sarah said, watching Olivia try to eat a leaf she had found on the ground. "Thank you." "For what?" "For answering the phone that night. For staying on the line. For caring about a desperate stranger." David kissed her forehead. "Thank you for calling the wrong number and for giving me the chance to become the man I always wanted to be." As the afternoon sun began to set over New York City, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the new family remained there in the garden of the daycare that symbolized everything they had built together. It wasn't a perfect ending. They would still have challenges, discussions, and tough moments like any real couple. But it was a perfect new beginning, a wrong number that had turned absolutely right. A story of how love can transform not just two lives, but an entire community when two people decide. It is possible to build something better together than they could build alone. And in the simplicity of that moment, the kids playing on the grass, friends celebrating around, the city sprawling in the distance, Sarah finally understood what her mother had always tried to teach her. That true love is not about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to love someone imperfect perfectly every day.